starting a little early just to see if this thing works. And it looks like it may or may not be working. Does it look like it's working on your end, Stacy? There we are. All right. It is working. Excellent. So we're starting up a little early just to kind of get things rolling here. The plan is for us to put some sort of content up just about every day. Some of it will be live streaming like this. Others will be pre-recorded videos or maybe links to the work other organizations are doing. We have actually reached out to a number of organizations in the state looking to coordinate that schedule. So keep an eye on our Facebook page, keep an eye on the museum webpage, and we'll try to get that all laid out for everybody. Today, we're going to meet some of our education animals. We're going to meet a couple live owls. But first, since it's not quite noon yet, for those of you who maybe are not familiar with the museum, right now we're in our seabird room, which is the first room of the museum. We actually have the down exceptions. Every one of those species either does or did live in the Northeast. Elk don't live here anymore. They used to be quite common. We have some extinct birds in the collection as well. So though, that is not usually what people are excited about when they talk about museum programs. We're well aware of that. The Dead Animal Museum, not for everybody. So we do also have some live animals here. And all the live animals at the museum, the animals you're going to meet in a lot of these live streams, are all handicapped animals. And they've come to us from wildlife rehabilitators, or in the cases of some of the reptiles, they're illegal or unwanted pets that have found a home here. So as we're starting to get going here, and look at that, we've got a couple people popping in. We are going to be talking about owls today. We're going to be getting up close with them. We'll see how this all goes. This is brand new to us, trying to live stream these programs. Typically, we are traveling around the state and region. Understandably, a lot of those programs this time of year have been canceled. So we are looking for other ways to reach out and connect you folks with the nature of Vermont. So what do you think? Is it time? Are we ready? Yes. Stacy's nodding yes. Volunteer board member Stacy Babb is running the camera today. And let's dive in. We're going to start off with an owl that is not our most common owl in the state. This little guy is most likely going to be found in the warmer parts of Vermont. So the Champlain Valley, the southeastern and southwestern corners of the state. This is the eastern screech owl. And you take a look at this little fella. This is an adult screech owl. People often ask when they see the small owls, right away people will go, oh, it's a baby owl. Once an owl can fly, it's full size. So if you see a little tiny owl out there and it's flying around, it has all its feathers, it doesn't matter if it's this big or this big. That's a full-grown owl. We are very close, though, to baby owls. Owls, especially the larger owls, breed in the winter. So great horned owls are sitting on eggs right now. Barred owls are really close. And in another month or so, the screech owls will be starting their families. If we're going to be talking about owls, you really have to talk about predators. Because this little guy, as adorable as he is the scariest thing a mouse can ever dream up. We'll take a look at those feet. Look at those things. The feet of an owl are its weapon. These are the long claws there, or the talons. And talons are what every owl, hawk, falcon, and eagle use to capture their food. And that's why we group those birds, who really aren't that closely related. That's why we group them all together as raptors, because of that action of literally grabbing your food. The beak is another characteristic, though, they all share. Look at that little hooked beak. You know, on an owl, their heads are so fluffy, that little beak, often it looks small, when really this owl's mouth is big enough, he can swallow a small mouse. You get something like a big horned owl, which is kind of this bird amped up to this size. That guy's swallowing big voles in one gulp. Big mouths on little birds, especially true of a screech owl in a different way. They get their name probably for their call. And it's not a horrible scream, as you might expect. One call sounds a lot like a horse whinnying. Not too bad, right? Worth checking out if there's a horse whinnying behind your house tonight. Either way, should be interesting. And then the other call is considered the trill. It sort of sounds like, kind of like that. So you might imagine an owl like this is pretty hard to find just because of those colors, right? I mean, this little guy's bark colored. And in the daytime, most of our owls are not very active. So when you and I are walking around with our sharp eyes, we really have pretty great eyes. And we're looking around for animals out there in nature. When we're taking a walk or a hike, we could walk right by this little screech owl and not even notice. So he's going to be tucked right up against the side of some big old maple tree. That bark-colored feathers are going to blend right in. And if that screech owl's lucky, if it has access to hollow trees, they'll be even harder to spot because they'll be literally out of sight inside a hollow tree. And for most owls, that's also where they're going to want to nest. That's where they want to raise their kids. They don't build nests themselves. So if they can find some little hollow, a small owl like this one, that's a good safe place to raise their young. The bigger owls might move into an abandoned nest some other bird built, like a hawk or a crow or something like that. So as we're going along today, you probably are figuring out, I can just blah, 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 blah. But I'm going to keep looking at this computer screen and seeing if folks have questions. We'll try to cover those questions. We are going to meet another owl here in a few minutes and continue on for half an hour or as long as y'all are interested. So let's see, any questions yet? Oh, look at all this positive reinforcement. We like the positive reinforcement too. So I mentioned in the beginning that all of the live animals we have here are handicapped for some reason. And have any of you figured out what's wrong with Soren? Yeah, this screech owl has a pretty serious injury. And I don't know how many of you all, he's like, get that camera out of my face. Paparazzi. But anybody else, I'm just going to give a chance. If anybody wants to type it in real quick. Do we see what it is? Oh, there's a question too. Cool. So while y'all are working on answering that one, there's a question of how old is this bird? And honestly, we don't know. He was an adult when he was hit by a car, and that was about 3 years ago. So this bird's at least 4 years old. And in the wild, that's pretty much the lifespan of a screech owl. If they can live 4 to 6 years or so out in the wild, they're pretty successful. With us here at the museum, he should be able to live into his teens, assuming he doesn't have some sort of unknown injury that the vets and ourselves haven't been able to pick up on. How about the obvious injury? Let's take a look. Anybody have it yet? Sylvia Casano, nailed it. His eye. Yeah, he was struck by a car and it hit him right in the eye. You see how that left eye is kind of blown out? Yeah, the iris is messed up. He has a detached retina, which for those who aren't familiar with eye anatomy, that's kind of the back of your eye. It's the part that really does the seeing. And instead of laying down there nice and flat, his is crumpled up and floating around. So he's completely blind in that eye. Owl eyes are very important to them. One of the things that we notice right away when we look at an owl are those large forward-facing eyes. And if we could shave this bird's head, which we won't, don't worry, but if we did, his eyes would look even bigger than they look now. His eyeballs actually outweigh his brain. To give you an idea, proportionately, if I was an owl with a skull this big, my eyes would be the size of softballs. Gigantic eyeballs that are so big and so heavy, he doesn't have a muscle system around those eyes like we do. So an owl can't do this. Instead, this owl has a bony structure that's called a sclerotic ring that grips the back of his eye, keeps it from falling out of his head, so that's good, but it also means he can't move his eye. You all know how they compensate for that, right? Owls are great at turning their heads. They have 14 vertebrae in their neck, twice as many bones as we have. And that allows this bird to turn its head 270 degrees. Math check while we're home. What is that in fractions? I'm just going to tell you. That's 3/4 of the way around. So if you start straight ahead, turn your head to the left, go all the way around the back, put your chin on your right shoulder. That's how the screech owl does. He probably won't do it for us, but keep an eye on him. He might. Just take a quick check for some more questions. More guesses, nice. How many eggs will this bird usually lay, asks Lane. Most of your owls are generally going to lay around 4 eggs. And there's some variance in there, the health of the owl, how much food resources the bird has. But usually you're looking around 4 eggs. And if half of those birds live a year, that's a very successful owl. That first year is awful hard on any wildlife, but especially if you're a little tiny predator like this guy. Not only does he have to watch out for other predators, which for an owl is mostly bigger owls, he also has to catch food that doesn't want to be food. If you're a bunny rabbit eating clover, pretty easy to catch that. Loving these questions. This is awesome. So, how y'all doing? More questions? Let's see. Something else about a screech owl we should point out, because the next owl we're going to meet doesn't have it, are these feathers on his head. You see those? Some owls, like a great horned owl or a long-eared owl, they're named for these structures, but they're not horns or ears. They're just feathers. And when those feathers are up, it tells us something about the bird. It can tell us that basically he's having positive feelings. He's calm, he's comfortable, maybe he's being aggressive, but those feathers up are more a confident owl. When those feathers are down, that's when he's kind of freaking out. That's when he's scared, that's when he's upset. You might have noticed just now when he jumped around a little bit, those feathers went down. He didn't like that. He was getting a little upset. Now I stood them back up. I was messing with his emotions, I know, but I stood them back up. If he was still upset, he'd lay them down again. Don't worry, they wouldn't stay up if he was upset. How long do owls sleep? Nice question, Elias. And it's tricky because we think about, if you're nocturnal, you sleep all day. If you're diurnal, that's the name for us, active in the day, you zonk out all night, right? Most animals don't sleep that way. Most of them, during their kind of inactive time, they're going to nap more than we zonk out for 8 hours. So throughout the day, the owl is going to rest and doze, going to cough up a pellet at some point, but they really don't crash like we do. A little different. Alyssa Catherine, what other colors do screech owls come in? That's a great question. And bird nerds are going to get mad at me for the answer I am about to give. Officially, screech owls come in red or gray, like this one, and this is the most common color phase in the north. And then also red, kind of a Lucille Ball red color actually at the extremes, like really red. In the taxidermy collection, we have 2 of those like really intermediate birds. They're a mix of gray and brown and red feathers. And that doesn't mean anything about male or female. I mean, you can have red and gray and brown screech owls all come out of the same nest. They can get together and have red, gray, and brown babies. The commonality of seeing more gray in the north as opposed to the south is usually considered a function of winter. Because when those leaves come off the trees, owls, for the most part, this isn't 100%, but for the most part, owls don't migrate. So if this screech owl is living in the north in the winter, there's no leaves on the trees. His hiding spots are greatly reduced. For this gray owl, it's not a big deal, right? You find the trunk of a tree and zonk, I'm gone. That red owl has a much harder time finding those places, so it's a little more vulnerable to predators. At least that's one theory of why we have more gray out here. Look at all these questions. Yes, Aaron, screech owls are cute. Neat. So, boy, a bunch of neat, specific questions there. And I know I'm missing some of these questions. We'll come back through. Do screech owls eat their food on the ground? If they have to, right? Eating food on the ground is more dangerous. But these little birds are tough. And most of their diet is going to be things like mice, little frogs, June bugs, right? Like large insects. But every now and then, a screech owl will take on a chicken. Yeah, crazy. Don't worry, not a giant chicken, but like a little chicken. And that bird's not going to fly away with that. In general, owls can get off the ground with about half their body weight. This little bird weighs just between 1/4 and 1/2 pound. So he's not flying away with anything really heavier than a big mouse. Lots of questions. Oh, I think I just answered what they eat. And someone wants me to tell Lucy that Caleb is watching. I think maybe I feel like we're exhausting the screech owl. It might be time to move on to the next bird. And before we do, owls are different from other birds in a lot of ways, really right down to the feathers. And I have a couple wings here I just want to show you all. So this is a barred owl wing, and this is a red-tailed hawk wing. Superficially, they look pretty similar, right? Same kind of color palette. But as we look a little closer, and maybe Stacy, if you zoom in on those primary feathers, you're going to notice this fringe along the back edge. And then here on the leading edge, there's a fringe right there. And then we compare it to the red tail feathers. And look at that. I mean, a hard, sharp edge. And this changes of how the air goes over the wing. So with an owl, those fringes kind of break up the airflow. And the feathers themselves are very soft and flexible. So what those two things combine is when that bird's flying, its feathers aren't banging together as much. And the softness of the feathers muffles that sound. There's even some thought that some physics of how the fuzz lays on that feather works like acoustical tile to break down sound waves. So when an owl flies, it flies silently, just ghosts through the air. So by comparison, those hard, sharp-edged feathers of the hawk are really like the feathers of most other birds. That pigeon you heard come off the sidewalk, that chickadee buzzing over your bird feeder. We hear those little helicopter noises. That's that sharp-edged feathers, hard, stiff feathers, banging together. Makes a lot of noise. Of course, the bright side is hard feathers, you're fast. You can bob and weave really well. Soft feathers are like a soft canoe paddle. How fast do you go with a soft canoe paddle? Not very, yeah. So our owls are not fast flyers. They're not highly maneuverable. And really, they are something you want to watch for as opposed to listen to when it comes to that flying. Good question. How big are pellets? So with every owl, the pellets are going to be a different size based on the owl. That screech owl coughs out a pellet about that big. Oh, here we go, best part. Bam. You got that. So that barred owl coughs out a pellet about that long. It's about the same as a barn owl, a similar size owl. Whereas the big guys, like a great horned or a snowy owl, there's a crazy video of a snowy owl who's about twice the size of this bird, coughing up a pellet that was about that long. Oh yeah, and they make this face before they're gonna cough up a pellet. They do this like, anyway, no, we've gone too far. Stacey says I'm going too far. And for those of you who are like, what is a pellet? It's puke, not poop. That's the key thing to remember when you're taking one apart in class. Basically, when a bird eats something, whatever it eats that it can't digest, it won't pass. Solid objects don't go through a bird. So they're going to have to cough that pellet up. Really, a lot of birds make pellets. Our bald eagles, when they eat a rat, they can't digest the hair. So they're going to cough up a hairball. It's going to be a great big hair pellet. The owls get kind of famous for it because they don't digest the bones either. So they're going to cough up a pellet that not only is a big hairball, but inside that hairball are the skeletons of whatever it ate the night before. I would open up pellets any day. You guys looking for at-home science stuff? Get a hold of an owl pellet. It is the neatest thing. You can order them online, or better yet, go out, search around in the woods, and you might find one. Be aware, you might also find coyote droppings that sometimes look a lot like an old owl pellet. I don't know if you want to pick those ones apart or not. Probably still interesting. So, let's take a look at these questions. All right. No questions directly on my screen, so I probably missed some. We never introduced this bird, did we? No. So this is a barred owl. And this is the owl I would expect most of you have seen out in the wide world. There we go. Flapping some wings. His wings work. Yeah. This is also the owl we are most likely to hear really in most of the eastern United States. if you have a forest near your house, you probably have barred owls. And they have a very distinctive call. One, they hoot. That's nice, right? You get an owl that screams. You might not think it's an owl. And when owls hoot, each species has its own pattern. So for the barred owl, birders like to put words to these things. And for the barred owl, they say, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" That sounds crazy, doesn't it? That sounds weird. But if you say it with hoots, especially if you put a little monkey in your hoot, it kind of sounds like, what's up, buddy? Kind of sounds like, sort of like that, right? Is that sounding kind of familiar to you guys? Ooh, cool. Good question about hearing. We'll come right back to that one. But you hear that "who cooks for you" call, and it's a pretty easy one to imitate. I recommend you practice it all the time. Just kidding, kids. Practice until mom or dad say, stop. And then if you go outside tonight, especially if you hear them hoot first, and you can imitate that call, that owl's going to think, trespassers. And owls do not like trespassers. And they'll come looking for that trespasser. And you might get to see that owl. But don't worry. Once the owl sees you and goes, "Wait a minute, you're not a trespasser. You're just a kid," you'll be fine. Don't worry about a fight. So one of the questions here was, how do owls hear? And that's actually a great question to ask with the barred owl. Because barred owls are part of the group of owls that generally are considered more hearing-centric than vision-centric. And we're like, well, where's the ears, right? This guy doesn't even have those feathers that look like ears. His actual ear openings, the hole here in the side of your head the sound goes into, are on the side of his head, kind of like ours, kind of back in here behind his eyes. They're big, though. This 1.5-pound owl has ear holes about 3 times the size of mine. And that's not proportional. Proportionally, if his skull was the same size as my skull, you could put your whole hand inside his ear hole. It'd be gross, but kind of cool, right? And then to get sound into those ears, instead of having one of these things like we have, the owl uses his entire face. And a barred owl can take those feathers on his face and he can cup them forward, adjust those feathers to focus sound into those huge ear holes. Which lets a bird hear a sound as quiet as, in laboratory testing, a mouse at 50 yards. That's pretty amazing hearing. And some owls, not all, but some, like a barred owl, they go one step further. Their ears are crooked. So one's higher than the other ear. And that lets this bird triangulate a sound to hear exactly where the sound is coming from. Think about that for a second. In the winter, when it snows, a bird like a hawk that depends on its eyes to find its food, that bird looks out across that snowy field, no mice, no food, off to Florida. The barred owl looks at that snowy field, no mice, and then he listens. And the owl can hear there's a mouse under the snow, 30 feet ahead of me, 6 inches under the surface, glide in there on those silent wings and catch a mouse he never saw. Super predators. What's another question here? How do owls smell? Wait, that's not what you meant? Okay. Owls, and this is a neat question because in general, the answer you're going to get a lot of times when you ask that question is that most birds have no sense of smell. That's actually untrue. Birds like owls, have their smells been measured? Not that I've been able to find, so far as how acute is the sense of smell. But that idea that birds don't have sense of smells, and then the list of exceptions like turkey vultures and petrels and woodcock and things like that, that's probably not true. Is it one of his best senses? No, probably not. That vision and hearing, that's his arsenal there. But yeah, owls can smell some. I mean, as good as us. I don't know. I'm not sure if anybody knows. Link us an article if you do. What's the owl's name? This owl is called Alistair. The wildlife rehabilitator who originally treated Alistair named him that. Come on, buddy. He was actually hit by a car almost 11 years ago now. And the rehabber who took him in saw that Alistair also has a bad eye. It's not as obvious with this dark eye. And realized that was irreparable. He would never be releasable. And tried to find the bird a home, but couldn't find it a home. And for years, he couldn't find this owl a home. And we had one of our birds die. And so the first thing we do when that happens is we contact local rehabilitators to see if they have an animal that needs a home. And the rehabber I was talking to about that was, oh, I've got Alistair. And I was like, what's an Alistair? Because years before, we'd put jesses, these leather straps on the bird to help him find it a home. Look, it's a trained bird. It'll sit on the glove. You want to give this bird a home. And so now we gave him a home. He's here. Lots of questions. How old is he? We're not sure. You know, he's at least 11 or 12 years old. That's how long he's been in captivity. And in captivity, these birds can live into their 20s. But out in the wild, 11 or 12 years old, that's a very successful barred owl. That's a rock star. All right, cool. And he's a little wound up here today. I should point out, in case any of you are getting concerned, when he does jump like that, remember what his legs are for, right? His legs are what he uses to catch and kill his food. Their legs are incredibly strong. If you have a parakeet or something at home and you're thinking, hey, that'll help me keep my parakeet under control, don't do that with those birds. These jesses, these leather straps, are something that have been in use for about 4,000 years through the art of falconry for hunting with birds of prey. And it doesn't hurt him a bit to jump around like that. It does irritate him, I think, when he does it, but he's a working owl. All right, Olivia and Logan, how fast can the barred owl fly? I'm not sure, but not fast. Probably 30 miles an hour or so would be my bet. That's worth a Google search. You guys should investigate that further. Okay, and and Jordan and Christian asked how old the owl was. I did not give Jordan and Christian credit for that. Sorry, guys. This is our first time. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's see. What have we not talked about with owls yet? How's our time? Oh, look at that. Almost half an hour. We nailed it.
You're missing some questions.
Oh, I'm missing a bunch of questions, says Stacy.
Somebody wants to know if they shed their talons.
Oh, did they shed their talons? Great question. Not normally. They shouldn't. But as the talons grow, it's kind of cool. You know, like our fingernails, as they grow, they get longer and longer. With a raptor, the fibers of those talons grow in a spiral. So as they get longer, they get sharper. That's crazy adaptation if you think about it, right? Because this bird's out in the world and it's landed on tree branches. It's going down in the rocks after a mouse. Those talons are going to get blunted. But just over time, they'll sharpen themselves. But yeah, they don't shed their talons per se. What was the other question you said I missed?
How do they build nests and what materials do they use?
Owls don't actually build their own nests. No, owls ideally are going to find a hollow tree or, I mean, really a silo or your hayloft, some sheltered place. The bigger owls, though, like a barred owl, will take over the nest of another bird. That's a big advantage to not migrating. As soon as you're like, all right, it's time to nest, the hawks they're not back yet, so they don't have that nest claimed. So a barred owl might take over a red-shouldered hawk nest or a crow nest, and when those birds show up looking to reuse that nest, they're out of luck, really. I mean, owls are tough. Pound for pound, this bird will take a hawk his size.
Will they eat snakes? That's another question on here.
Lots of neat questions. Okay. So, are they affectionate? Not really. You know, I mean, sometimes we'll see those videos of people with the little owls, and they're always like, "Oh, sweet little, I love him." That's not really how owls are wired, and I'm gonna upset some people who are out there cuddling owls right now. But imagine maybe when you were a kid, or you kids, you have a relative like this, where you show up at some family gathering. Yeah, see, he doesn't even like talking about it. And somebody come, maybe an uncle or someone goes, "Hey, sport, how you doing?" You make like this face. Next time you're watching those cute little owl videos, look at that face. It's the same face. It's that, stop it, Uncle Jim, right? Think about it. And then there was, oh, look at all this. We've got people answering questions for me. Thanks, Libby. Yes, owls can turn their heads about 270 degrees. And there's so many neat adaptations that go into that. The openings in an owl's neck that the spinal cord runs through are proportionally larger than that in other birds. Their blood vessels going to their brain have like thick spots at the base of their skull that works like a reservoir of blood. So when the owl does crank its head all the way around, and I think we'll bring the other owl out here in a second for those of you who missed the first owl. When the owl cranks its head all the way around, he doesn't cut off his blood supply. He has this extra supply of oxygenated blood right there at the base of the skull, so he doesn't pass out. So, you know, that's good. Let's see if he wants to go back in his box. Looks like a yes. Okay. A whole bunch of questions here. How do they find a mate? Great question. For the most part, owls will mate for life. I mean, it doesn't always work out, but for the most part, they mate for life. And typically, and we're talking some big generalities here. Feel free to nail me with the exceptions. Generally, the male owl will set up a territory, and he'll start advertising. He's like, I've got a good spot here, plenty of food, good spots to raise the kids, and he'll start shouting. And for the screech owl, that's going to sound kind of like a whinny or a trill. Those are going to be his main calls we hear. With that barred owl, that was that call. And the girl screech owls in this case are going to hear him and go, wow, like, he sounds pretty good. Let's check it out. And he's going to have to impress her. He's going to have to show her, look, I can get food. I've got a good spot to build a nest. She'll usually be like, yeah, this spot's no good. We're going to use this one. And they'll go through a whole courtship where the two birds bond, and then they'll raise the kids. That next fall, they'll probably separate for a little bit and then come back together at the end of the winter, in the case of the screech owls, and do it all over again, which is pretty cool, you know. Separate vacations, maybe that's the secret. What is the biggest owl? And are owls aggressive? We'll hit those two at once. Owls are not aggressive towards people, if that's what you were thinking. But they are predators, so if you're something they want to eat, they're crazy aggressive. The one exception where we can have owls coming after us is really this time of year going through the late spring and early summer when they have young. Birds in general are great moms. Owls are no exception to that. So if you are too close to a nest with young especially, mom more than dad, but those adult owls are going to try to scare you away. And with some of them, like a great horned owl, that bird might make contact. There was a barred owl that got in the news a couple of years ago out in Seattle. She'd set up in a park in the winter when nobody was out jogging, right over a jogging trail. And she got to be in the news for stealing people's hats as they jogged by her nest. Do they really look like dinosaurs when they're wet? Well, I think they look more like rubber chickens with giant heads when they're wet myself. I guess it depends what kind of dinosaur you're talking about, right? The dinosaur stuff, we're going to get on a huge tangent here. Technically, all birds are the last surviving line of dinosaurs. Yeah, they are dinosaurs. So you blow this guy right up, give him funny little arms instead of wings, you got a T-Rex. Sort of. Okay, so I see here someone has put a note that the museum is free. That's actually not true. Most of our on-site programming is free, especially if we have guest speakers in. But admission, we do have a low admission. It's $5 for adults, $2 for kids 5 to 12, $3 for seniors. And we are closed through April 6th under recommendations of state and federal government. So it's not free, but you can't come in. So are owls, Carrie, really? Are owls better hunters than mountain lions? I have no idea. We have to look up success rates. In general, predators succeed about 1 in 10 tries. You've got some that do much better than that, and some that don't do as well as that. And there's going to be a lot of factors in there. So I don't know. Look that one up. Maybe I'll look it up later. And, oh, do they fight each other? Yeah, absolutely. Colleen, they do fight each other. Birds of prey in general are not real social animals. You know, there's the mate, there's the kids. When the kids grow up, they're out. So any kind of trespassing adult owl would get chased off and fought. And then when you look at interspecies competition, the bigger owls will usually actually eat the little owls if they get the chance. So this little guy is not happy when a barred owl moves into town. Really, he's one of our smallest owls, so he's not happy when any owl moves in. So I'm looking at the clock. I'm seeing we have hit 12:30. So I encourage folks to keep sending in questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but I will revisit this post and answer whatever questions we've missed, or try to anyway. We're going to attempt to do more of this as long as we're closed. So we're going to be doing some more live streaming. The plan right now is I'm going to go out and do some filming out in the beech forest here on the Hogback Mountain Conservation Area. And tomorrow we'll post a video about bear sign in the woods. That will not be live, but it'll be a video with hopefully some good information on it. And keep an eye on the museum's Facebook page. Visit our website at vermontmuseum.org. And we'll have schedules as we get the schedule put together for these live feeds and other videos that we're going to be putting up. And keep your eyes open. All kinds of great organizations around the country are switching to this online format so that you guys that are home from school or home from work have something else to do besides watch cartoons. So thank you all very much for tuning in today, and get outside. Hopefully we'll see you in April. Have a good one.